Today's lesson is on using the distributive property as review and introduction to using FOIL to multiply binomials. So we'll start with a review of the distributive property. An example of the distributive property looks like this, where we have one quantity outside the parentheses and two or maybe even more quantities inside the parentheses. For today, we'll use two pieces inside. So what we're going to do is we're going to distribute the quantity that's outside the parentheses to both quantities inside the parentheses. So we do this by multiplying first 3 times the 8 and then 3 times the x. So it would look like this: 3 times 8 plus 3 times x. And then we would multiply the numbers. 3 times 8 is 24, and 3 times x is simply 3x. Let's look at another example. -4 times the quantity x plus 3. So we're going to multiply the first terms, the -4 times the x, and then we'll multiply the -4 times the 3, distributing the -4 to both terms inside the parentheses. And our result would be this: -4 times x plus -4 times 3. -4 times x is simply -4x, while -4 times 3 is -12, and we can write that as -12. Now, here at this example, we have -3 outside the parentheses and x minus 2 inside the parentheses, so we need to be careful when we're multiplying the negatives. Here we have -3 times x, and then the second term is -3 times -2. And this is what it looks like: -3 times x minus -3 times 2. And you'll notice that -3 times x is simply -3x. But when you're subtracting a -3x times 2, because it's -3 times -2, the sign always goes with the number, you end up with the double negative, creating plus 6. Here's another example where maybe it's not just plain x inside the parentheses, you've also got a number in front of the x. So we have 5 outside to distribute, and we'll multiply 5 times the 4 and 5 times the x. The little arrows are being stubborn here. There's 5 times the 4x and 5 times the 8. And this is our result: 5 times 4x plus 5 times 8. So when we have a number in front of the x, we're simply going to multiply the two numbers together. 5 times 4 is 20 for 20x, and then 5 times 8 is 40. Here's our last example of distribution. So again, we have 3 outside the parentheses and 2x minus 7 inside the parentheses. So we'll take 3 and multiply it by the first term, which is 2x, and we'll take 3 and multiply it by the second term, which is -7. So our result is 3 times 2x minus, because of the minus in here by the 7, minus 3 times 7, and our result is 6x minus 21. Now go to the worksheet and do problems 1 through 4. Pause the video while you do these. The next part of our lesson has to do with distributing when we have 2 terms times 2 terms, or a binomial times a binomial. X plus 3 inside the parentheses is considered a binomial, as is x plus 2. We use the abbreviation FOIL because we're going to distribute, first multiplying the first terms, and then the outside terms. And then we multiply the 2 inside terms and the 2 last terms. So the FOIL is just an abbreviation for repeated distribution. We have two things out front now instead of just one, so we have to distribute both of them. We distribute the x to both terms, and we distribute the 3 to both terms. And then FOIL is just an abbreviation to remember the order and make sure you don't forget one of the pieces. Here's what the result would look like. We would have x times x as the first terms, and then we'd have x times 2 or 2x for the outside terms. See, notice they're placed outside and outside, the very outer perimeter of the whole problem. Then we have 3 times x, which is the two inside terms of the whole problem, and then we have 3 times 2, which are the last terms of the whole problem. When we put this all together, x times x is simply x squared. 2 times x plus 3 times x, those are like terms, so we add them together to get 5x. And then 3 times 2 is 6. So first, outside, inside, and last is the order of multiplication. The middle two terms, outside and inside, should always end up being like terms and be able to add together. The first and the last terms, however, do not. So let's go to another page and try some examples. Pause the video to try them yourself before the answer is revealed. So in example number 1, you have x minus 2 times x plus 5. Be careful with the negatives, and remember, you can multiply first terms, outside terms, inside terms, and last terms. Pause the video and try this problem. Remember, when solving this problem, you want to multiply first, outside, inside, and last. So here is the answer. X times x plus 5 times x minus 2 times x minus 2 times 5, which simplifies to x squared, and then 5x minus 2x is 3x, and then negative 2 times 5 is negative 10 for minus 10. Here's the next one. Pause before, well, the answer is showing. So pause, try it, and check and compare your answer. When we multiply first, outside, inside, and last, our result will be x times x for first, negative 1 times x for outside, negative 4 times x for inside, and negative 4 times negative 1 for last. Be very careful with the negatives. We end up with x squared, negative 1x minus 4x is negative 5x, and then negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. Try number 3. Pause the video and try it before revealing the answer. Okay, now that you've tried it, here is the answer. We have, instead of just x plus 3, we have 2x plus 3 this time. So 2x times x is 2x squared, 2x times 1 for outside, 3 times x for inside, and 3 times 1 for last. So our end result is 2x squared, then 2x times 1 is 2x, 3 times x is 3x, add those together, we have 5x, and then 3 times 1 is simply 3. Let's go on to example number 4. Notice that in example number 4, we have 3x plus 1 and 2x plus 4. So be careful when multiplying your terms. Pause the video, try it yourself, and then reveal the answer. Here is the answer. First, we have 3x times 2x, and then we have for outside terms 3x times 4. For inside terms, we have 1 times 2x, and for last terms, we have 1 times 4. When we put this together, 3x times 2x, multiply the numbers for 6, multiply the x's for x squared. giving us 6x squared. 3x times 4 is 12x, and 1 times 2x is 2x. So I wrote those separately, multiplied out in the second step. And then 1 times 4 is 4. The last thing to do is add your like terms, which happen to be the 12x and the 2x. So we end up with 6x squared plus 14x plus 4. I bet you're doing great. Let's try the last example, being very careful with the negatives. So, here it is. 5x times 2x plus 5x times 3 minus 1 times 2x minus 1 times 3. So our result, when we put our terms together, is 10x squared, because 5 times 2 is 10, and x times x is x squared. 5x times 3 is 15x. Negative 1 times 2x is minus 2x, and negative 1 times 3 is minus 3. When we put the middle two terms together, we get 10x squared plus 13x minus 3. Now you're finished with the examples, and you can go and finish the worksheet.